In 1898, Marie Curie isolated radium in a Paris laboratory, and what she found glowing in those glass vials would trigger one of the most catastrophic episodes of mass poisoning the modern world had ever seen. The specific community, still young in its understanding of atomic energy, looked at that soft blue-green luminescence and saw medicine. Radiation was invisible, it was powerful, and it moved through solid matter. And to a society already drunk on the promise of industrial progress, that was enough to call it a gift from nature. Today, we're getting into all of it: the science, the deaths, the people who sold it, and the ones who wore it. Stay tuned, and if this is a kind of history that keeps you up all night, consider subscribing, because I have a lot more where this came from. Radium hit the consumer market almost immediately, branded as liquid sunshine. Manufacturers bottled it into tonics, face creams, and drinking water devices. Doctors prescribed it. Advertisers promised it could reverse blindness, slow aging, restore energy, and reawaken a dulling mind. The language around it was almost religious. This was a substance pulled from the earth that seemed to emit its own light, and the medical establishment handed that mythology to marketing without much resistance. The glow itself did the rest of the work. That blue-green luminescence was not a side effect, it was a selling point. Wealthy women began wearing radium-laced jewelry and evening gowns specifically to shimmer in darkened ballrooms. Painters applied radium paint to watch dials, cosmetics, and decorative objects. The aesthetic of radioactive light became a signal of taste, wealth, and modernity. Nobody knew what they were chasing was cellular destruction, wearing the costume of elegance. Radium toothpaste was not a fringe product. It was a status symbol sold in upscale pharmacies around Europe and America, marketed to people who could afford to care about the quality of their smile. The promise was a grin that glowed in the dark and at evening opera performances. That was exactly what some wealthy attendees displayed. Brands like Doramad packaged radium directly into their formulas, advertising it as a mineral that strengthened enamel and purified the mouth. People brushed with it nightly, sometimes twice a day, absorbing radiation into their gums, their jawbones, and their bloodstream through some of the most absorbent tissue in the human body. The cosmetic industry ran the same playbook with powder and rouge. Radioactive face products promised a pallor that looked almost mystical, a kind of permanent luminous stillness to the skin that no standard cosmetic could produce. The pallor itself was fashionable, tied to the Victorian and Edwardian ideals of delicate femininity, and radium delivered it in a way that seemed almost supernatural. Women applied these powders to their faces before social events, layering radiation directly onto their skin in the name of looking ethereal. What made this more than a beauty trend was what it communicated socially. Radium was expensive, scientifically endorsed, and visibly different from anything the middle class could access. The shimmer it produced under certain lighting was not subtle, and in the right rooms, it read immediately as wealth. Owning radium products placed a person at the intersection of luxury and progress, and that intersection was exactly where Victorian and Edwardian high society wanted to be seen standing. The glow was a receipt, and people wore it on their faces willingly. Radium paint on fabric was not an accident or an oversight. It was a deliberate design choice made by dressmakers and their clients who understood exactly what they were asking for. Debutantes attending high fashion galas during the peak of the Victorian social season wore gowns that had been treated or threaded with radium-based paint so that under low light they appeared to emit their own luminescence. The effect turned a ballroom floor into something closer to a display of living candles. Each woman a source of soft, ghostly light. Seamstresses who applied the paint by hand, often licking their brushes to keep a fine point, were absorbing lethal doses in their workrooms. The women who wore the finished gowns were doing the same on the dance floor. The air inside those ballrooms carried a problem nobody could see. Radium decays into radon, a radioactive gas, and in enclosed places where radium-treated fabrics, cosmetics, and decorative objects were concentrated, radon levels would have been significant. Every breath taken in those rooms pulled ionizing particles directly into lung tissue. The aristocracy stood in those spaces for hours, socializing, dancing, laughing, with no awareness that the atmosphere itself was working against them at a cellular level. The damage was invisible and it was cumulative, and it began the moment they walked through the door. The social season created a rhythm of repeated exposure. These were not one-time events. They were weekly fixtures for family embedded in high society, which meant the same bodies were returning to the same radioactive environments across months. The drive to be seen, to be present at every significant gathering, to wear the most current and expensive things the market offered, locked people into a schedule of slow, internal damage they had no framework to recognize. The fatal doses were delivered in a single night. They were built across an entire season of waiting to be the most luminous person in the room. Thank you for watching. Until the next one.